Great. So let's start. Let's dive right in. Martin, welcome everyone to this webinar about where we'll talk about how Isar Aerospace is approaching the topic of ownership in their company. And I'm thrilled today to welcome Martin Schleich, Chief of Staff at Isar Aerospace. Martin, thank you so much for joining us today. And today we will talk about first Isar Aerospace company and mission. We're super excited to learn about this. And in the second part, I would love to ask Martin really about how they approach the topic of ownership, how their culture around ownership looks like, and also very curious to learn about any best practices you might have. And at the end, we'll also have a time for questions. So feel free to put your questions in the Q&A panel. All right, so Martin, let's dive right in. And I would say, first of all, Isar was founded in 2018, so it's still a young company, and you've achieved really some incredible milestones so far since being founded, and really, changing the way of how people think about the economics of spaceflight. All of this from Europe, from Germany. And so maybe to start off, could you tell us in a few words about the story of Isar?
Yes, I can. A few words will be hard. That's a harsh limit, but I will try to go maybe through the main steps, which I consider super important in Isar's development, and also maybe through some steps which are not that well publicly known. But yeah, let's start from the beginning. 2018, this is when Isar Aerospace was founded. Back then it was founded by 3 students, basically fresh out of college, Daniel, Joseph, and Marcus. Started Isar Aerospace with the vision to lower the entry barriers to space. And so far, or back then, the only solutions available in Europe were established players, comparably expensive, government funded, a very, very different approach compared to what was happening in the US already with the new micro launches. And it was foreseeable that there is a big danger that Europe is losing, let's say, a competition in a key technology again, which happened before, I would say, in internet and probably semiconductors. And if you lose these battles won, it's very likely that you won't be able to turn it around later on. And our 3 founders, they said this should not happen to space because space is super important. It's a key technology, and we can very well develop on and very well promising technologically advanced rockets here in Europe. And so they decided to start Isar Aerospace as a micro launcher company to compete with these other launchers. The first few employees who joined Isar Aerospace were actually, they all knew each other before. So the founders and the first employees, they knew each other because all of them worked before in the VAR, which is a student group at TU Munich. And the VAR is Wissenschaftliche Arbeitsgemeinschaft für Raketentechnik und Raumfahrt. So it's a space science, rocket science student group. And there they already work together on different types of rockets, smaller rocket components, and so on and so forth. And they also established already this rapid prototyping approach. And the first employees came to Isar Aerospace, joined the company, but they knew each other for a very long time. So I would say that the start was kind of smooth with regards to hiring, to attracting the right people, the key talents. And then they just used the rapid prototyping approach they had used before at the company. And this means design component, build a component, and test a component. And through this rapid prototyping approach, we were able to show early on success in key developments of subcomponents. And these key developments attracted early investors. And we are very lucky to have some key investors early on. And first and foremost, definitely, we have to name Bülent Altan here, who is former VP avionics at SpaceX, who invested in Isar Aerospace early on, which also showed like there is a very solid technology development going on in this company. And yes, so we grew with that capital. We kept our rapid prototyping approach. We kept also our approach to hire top talent in rocket science. And we grew further and further, and we attracted more and more capital and more talent. I would say that we are in a very interesting stage right now. We are by now the most well-funded new space startup in Europe, raised roughly 180 million, I think, in total. We grew to 220 employees, active in 4 different countries. We have people from 30 different nations. And of course, we are growing also our infrastructure. We are growing our culture as well. And we are still, of course, doing our rapid development, our prototyping, and we are testing our components. And our first launch is planned for 2022 from Andoya in Norway. So yeah, we are in the middle of, I would say, hyper growth and yeah, a steep developing curve.
Wow, fascinating story, and yeah, incredible milestones already achieved, and extremely exciting also to hear that the launch is already planned for next year, the first launch. So can't wait for that one. We'll follow it very closely. And so you mentioned, you know, the motivation of the founders early on to start Isar in Germany. What would you say, you know, if I'm let's say a potential customer of Isar? What is the central value proposition of Isar Aerospace? Yeah,
I would say that's a super interesting question. I think that the different type of customer would be, of course, answered differently. But in general, I think one of the key differentiators, which I mentioned before already, is that we are trying to lowering the costs significantly. So we are aiming for to bring up to 1,000 kilograms for 10 million up in the orbit. And this is quite competitive pricing internationally, especially with the new space companies also in the US, which is definitely significantly lower than what you would pay currently in Europe for launching with larger launch vehicles. On top of that, however, I think it's not just the price where we differentiate, it's also the way we are doing business. And first of all, we have a strong focus on sustainability. So everything we do, it starts with, of course, the manufacturing and the way we operate our company. We are looking into the most modern technologies to use to minimize our carbon footprint and so on and so forth, and also to optimize everything. So sustainability, using additive manufacturing, for example, is a big issue for us, but also to use green propellants, sustainable propellants for our rocket engines is also a big issue for us. And we see that this is getting more and more important for the people as well in the market. On top of that, I think we are offering our customers a flexibility and a launch cadence, which was not there in the market so far. So for now, or I would say in the last couple of decades, it was quite normal that you would have to wait for a certain launch slot, a certain launch window to get your satellite on that launch vehicle. But with us, we are way more flexible. We can adapt to your schedule. We aim to launch nearly every month later on. And this gives us a big flexibility in the market to offer our launches to different customers and to optimize the timing. We are also very flexible in regards to which orbits we will go to and we will fly to. So this is also broadening our potential market. And in the end, like I said before, we are an independent solution. So we are not a government-funded company or government-backed company where you sometimes might have a conflict of interest. We are an independent player, privately funded. And I think these are the things that we are bringing to the market, which are new, especially in Europe.
Yeah. Great. And I mean, with such an inspiring, you know, mission and also value proposition, I mean, who wouldn't want to join Isar Aerospace, I think, but I'd still be curious to hear, what was your personal motivation to join?
Yes. So before I joined Isar Aerospace, I worked with a venture capital company and did some startup investment there. And I really enjoyed it and I really liked that. And I think it's a great and super interesting job. Nonetheless, I felt more attracted to actually work on the solutions and not just invest into them or being involved just in the investment process. And so I decided to change the sides, if you want, to change the sides of the table and to join a startup. And when I looked around for startups that I consider interesting, for me, it was very clear that I want to go to a startup which is really going for something big. And I think there are only a few challenges that are that big. as ours. And I really like the whole thing. I like the whole idea. It's a high risk scenario. We are in a high risk industry, if you want. We are doing hardware, which is not simple. It's a super interdisciplinary environment. And I consider that one of the most attractive challenges for me, because I saw, okay, this means I will have probably a steep learning curve, not just in one area, but in many other areas. All the challenges might be even harder at a hardware company than they would be in a software company. It's an international company. And for me personally, it was also super important that we are working on something European, that we are working on something which is which can be considered a European mission, to keep a key technology in Europe and to keep Europe on the train. And this was super important for me. Yeah.
Love it. Yeah, and that's, I think, also to this last point, I think we're at such a special moment in Europe in general for entrepreneurship. And yeah, I think space flight is certainly one key part of a thriving future for Europe. So yeah, that's
100%.
awesome.
I also have to add that I think that, I mean, back then when I was a child, it's actually funny now looking back, I always wanted to become a pilot, and then I started to study physics for one semester, but I didn't like it. But I always had kind of this tech exposure and always liked rockets. And when I joined TU Munich, first thing I wanted to do is focus on engineering and rocket engine development. And then they told me that will take way too long. You can't do that in your master's. And I said, okay, fine. But so it all came back together. And I think one of the things I really have to say here as well is, it's also a personal fit. You know, it's like when I met Dan and Joseph, we kind of clicked. So it was also not just paper-based, because what I said so far is you could figure it out on a spreadsheet, but it's super important that you click with the people that you work with, that you click with the culture that you want to work in. And this worked out quite fast, and that gave me a very good feeling.
That is very interesting to hear, and actually a perfect segue into my next question. Sorry, I think so far you've talked about Isar's mission and also these goals that you have for next year, such as your first launch. And now you touched upon culture, that this is also a strong reason for you to join. So could you elaborate a little bit on that point, and how would you describe the culture and the leadership style at Isar?
So I would say we are, it's quite interesting to see, in my opinion, that we are on the one hand, a quite local company in many regards, and on the other hand, a super international. And what I mean with that is, we are from Ottobrunn, we are from Munich. Most of our employees are here in this area. We have many employees hired from, for example, TU Munich or other Munich universities. At the same time, we have people from all around the world. So we have people from Costa Rica, Argentina, South Africa, New Zealand, you name it. We basically have it all. And so we are keeping it, I think, we are very well connected locally, and we also know the importance of the local environment, infrastructure for us, but we also are very open-minded at the same time. And this worked out so far quite well. So we are a local company which is very international in approach, if you want, but in the same time, then we internationalize further and further, and we become an international company, which is a strong connection to this area, but it's also broadening its mind more and more. So I think we are super European at the end of the day, a very, very European company. That's one of our key parts of our culture and identity, I think. We are also super much focused on flat hierarchies, transparent behavior between each other, being honest and open, and we have a very, very healthy culture on how we deal with mistakes and errors. And I think this is one of the most important things, especially in the field that we are active in. It's super normal that you do mistakes while you're developing a launch vehicle. Actually, we do even mistakes if you do not develop the launch vehicle. I can say that because I don't develop it and I do mistakes. And we communicate them quite openly. And the way we deal with them is, in my opinion, super human and also super goal oriented. I really liked it. It's a big part of our culture, I would say. We also have our values, and these values, we have 5 values in the company. First of all is love what you do. It's about a passion. We have a teamwork makes the dream work. Very important one. We have know your stuff, which is regarding responsibility. We have push the boundaries, which comes along with doing a launch vehicle development. And we also have no space for bullshit. So all these 5 together, they are quite visible. If you would visit us and work with us, you would see them. You would be able to perceive them early on. And I really like them. And I also come back to them every time I don't know how to approach a thing or a topic. And they usually are good guidance, a good reference. Regarding the leadership style, I think the leadership style is super closely connected to this culture. So we have, like I said, very open and honest discussions and communication, flat hierarchies. In many regards, I would say we have super democratic approaches to decision makings, to who is heard when, and how to make decisions. So yeah, maybe that's it in a nutshell, I would say.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And it's actually a great transition into the topic of ownership, because I think, you know, you mentioned teamwork as a big part of your culture. And also in our interactions as a user of Ledgy, which we're, you know, super honored and grateful for. You care a lot about ownership and you know, equity ownership, and so I would be curious to hear, you know, why do you care about the topic of ownership personally, but also as a company?
Yeah, that's probably mixed answer. So I would say because there is at least some parts which are relevant for both. So for me personally and for the company in general as well. I think very dry, if you take a look on it from like business administration research, for a long time there have been researched topics like agency problem, align interest, ensure decision making is in line with what the management wants. I think equity has proven to be a very good instrument to do that. At the same time, I would say that's actually that this might be the driest and maybe the least inspiring answer to that. And nonetheless, it's a part of it, but it's not what drives it, in my opinion, most. Personally, I think that startups are a super important part of the economy, of the German economy ecosystem, and they are offering something which has become very rare in our society, which is social upwards mobility. I don't think that there is too much social upwards mobility in our societies these days. Share programs, equity ownership programs, and startups can change that up to a certain degree. You have probably heard of many stories, probably at Ledgy. You have a way better overview of that than I have, but companies who exited, and then there were a bunch of people who became millionaires. And it's not just about making people rich. It's not the key goal. The key goal is, like I said, to offer social mobility, that people are inspired to work for something. And at the same time, I think we have to keep in mind it's an ecosystem play. So people who worked in a startup, who earn a certain amount of money in a startup, are more likely to start a company themselves or become investors and then bring it back to the ecosystem. So it's, in my opinion, a very, very good way to boost this ecosystem and to pay something back to it. And also, and I think this is probably also very much the company view, what I say now is people are putting not just their knowledge in this company, they're putting their lifetime into it, a certain degree of their lifetime. And they're taking a very high risk, and they are probably taking a salary which is below the average level in the market. And actually, you cannot compensate for that purely in money, in my opinion. If someone really spends like 10 years in a startup and in the end it works out and he has just a salary, like how could you justify that? I mean, that's ridiculous in my opinion. If this person was key contributor for the success, does not make any sense. These people should be rewarded and should have ownership in it, because then they will act like owners, and then would also will be recognized like owners. for me, it's not just a question of compensation, it's also a question of recognition. So people, if you hand people equity in your company, they feel valued the way they should feel valued, because they are a key contributor, like I said. And I think these are super, super important things that we have to keep in mind if we think about equity in companies and how we deal with equity in companies. And it's also something where I think Europe can take the next step very soon, or should take the next step very soon, so that we get to levels which are more comparable to the US, so that we get to levels which are also attracting people to startups, and make people in general aware of how it works in startups, that they know what it means to get equity. Yeah. Totally.
Resonating a lot with what you say, and yeah, as you said, I think it's for many reasons. It aligns everyone in the team, and it's also, you know, just super important for the ecosystem as a whole. And as you said, it's simply also the right thing to do. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing how you think about this. And now to switch gears a little bit and talk more about you know, practical tips and best practices you might have. So you mentioned before that you're operating as of today already as a very international organization. And so I would be curious to hear, like, what are the challenges you faced about granting ownership in an international way?
Yeah, so I think it probably actually started a little bit earlier, even when we were just in Germany and we just became high numbers and the growth rates became quite steep, and you had to issue all these employee participation program contracts, the VSOP contracts to all of these people. Then it was already getting hard and more difficult to keep up with that. But if you go international, you have to think about different jurisdictions. You have to think about the tax law in different countries. You have to think about how to design a contract. That's the first thing you have to do, probably. And at the same time, you also have to get familiar with how it is perceived in that country. So do people know about these programs there? Are they familiar with it? Is it maybe that we now export a German program to a country where they have programs which are very well established there, but ours is completely different from theirs? Or do we have something which is very much the same as their program or their established programs up there? So you need to understand, first of all, the legal environment, and I would say a little bit like let's call it the market or social environment for this program. And as soon as you have figured that out, you need to find a process or in the best way, you find a process which is scalable across these countries, with not too much effort to make individual changes for all of them. So when we internationalized, especially to Sweden, it was luckily quite easy. In many regards, we could kept the way we're doing it. And we decided to change only a little bit the dedicated education for the Swedish people, but it actually wasn't too much. So it was quite nice. However, if you compare it then to, for example, the US, that was a completely different game, because they have a very different systems established. They have a very, very different tax law from ours. And so there we had, for example, to definitely make changes to the contract, that these contracts are working in these jurisdictions. And of course, we had to take way more time to talk with employees over there to explain, okay, how we are doing that in Germany, why does it work that way? What does that mean for you? And so in the end, it's really dependent on the individual countries. I think you just need to be aware that if you internationalize with your participation program, that you cover like the most important things right in the beginning, and yeah, that you take care especially of the legal stuff.
Makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned education as a big part of granting ownership to the team, and that's a perfect segue into my next question, which would be, first of all, how do you tackle employee education? Do you have any best practices around, you know, just how to do it? And second of all, one of your main motivators, I think, to introduce Ledgy in your team was really about this. Like, this is an important aspect for you to make ownership transparent and really also educate the team. So yeah, could you elaborate on these 2 points? How do you educate, and how was Ledgy also received in your team?
Yeah. So probably the first thing you have to do if you want to educate someone on something is to educate yourself. And I really had to educate myself, of course, to this dedicated program and the special program at Isar Aerospace. You probably know how these programs work roughly in general, but every program is a little bit different, or tend to be a little bit different, has some certain rules in there. And I think for me, it was super important to take a lot of time to read into this topic, also to talk with our legal counsel, with our lawyers who helped us draft these contracts, and super happy to have them. They helped us a lot, and they also gave me a lot of knowledge on the topic. So first thing is to educate yourself as much as possible, and then you will never get to the point where there won't be an employee who will ask you a question you don't know the answer to, in my opinion. So every time I do something with them, I get a question which I have to look up then. But I think you can come to a point where you feel quite confident and answer like most of the questions. And then you should start thinking like putting yourself in the shoes of the employees. And this means like, what are the major concerns of the employees regarding the participation program? And then you've probably come to very simple conclusions like, first of all, they need to basically understand what it is all about before they can ask the right questions for themselves. So what I did back then was I drafted an overview document which explained in detail, and I would say in normal language, what EPP is, what virtual stock options are and how they work, because they have it in the contract, but in the contract it's like legal German or legal English. Nobody understands that, right? I mean, it's a completely different language than what we use every day. So it felt like, yeah, we will do that a little bit simpler. That helped a lot. On top of that, we did an online learning webinar, just like this one, where I also explained it to all the employees again. It was having Q&A session on it, made some examples, showing some calculations, how the numbers work, also showing tax implications. So giving quite a broad overview. On top of that, we also shared many documents then on the hub, on a central page to be available for all employees. I also promote that people should simply reach out if they have questions. I think that's super important that you always push that as well. And I get a lot of questions on a regular basis on EPP, which I think is quite good because it shows the engagement with the topic. And so we keep doing that, and we actually will add many more layers to it probably in the future, like regular online webinars and also regular probably visits from tax advisors who will then explain and go through questions which are super tax dedicated, maybe individually crafted by the employee regarding their own case. But one very, very important step for me was to, on top of all that, to implement a process which is more engaging. And this is where Ledgy came into play. You can make all these information, you can do all this education. At the end of the day, if it's just another contract, it's not another paper-based contract, if you sign, you put it away, you never look at it again, it doesn't feel very special. The engagement, probably the height of engagement is shortly before you sign. And in my opinion, that's not the way it should be. It should be, there will be definitely a high point, but there should be a higher level where it stays for some time. And Ledgy was for me super important exactly to reach that goal, because of all the many advantages such a solution granted us, like having ability to sign documents online, have a paper-free process where you don't need blue ink signatures, where you don't have to send contracts around the world basically, and then send them back because someone moved and the address is wrong or something like that, which happened quite some time. You also have, after you signed it, You have a very simple dashboard for the employee where he sees his individual package, his vesting scheme, the development of the value of his package in a super visual way, super simple way. And I think that's one of the key things, that you keep the engagement with the topic high after you made all this education, because at the end of the day, it costs the company also a lot of money if you want, of course, to offer that. It's giving away, you're giving away shares of the company. You don't want to do that and the employees forget about it after like 2 months. You want to, if you do that, you really want the employees remember that as long as they are with you. You want them to look into it every time you make a new round, every time your valuation goes up, every time you're getting closer to an exit. And that's exactly what you can do with this solution. Otherwise, they would have to build their own Excel files, put it in, and let's be honest, they won't do that. So there is no, there was no other option, and I thought that's the perfect way to go for. And so it was super important to us to implement that, and it worked out quite nicely, I have to say.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, I think what you just said is also what drives us at Ledgy. It's really to put the team's experience at the center. And so, yeah, super happy that this resonates with you as well. And yeah, also, I think I myself also learned a lot from your, practical and concrete best practices around making the language more accessible around ownership, and also making yourself available really to engage and show that this topic is an important one. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing this knowledge with our audience. And we are almost reaching the end of this webinar, but I'd love to take maybe 1 or 2 questions from the audience. So I'm just going to look in our Q&A panel. Okay, I have 1 question here. So Martin, do you find that team members have very different level of understanding of equity within the business? And should companies therefore produce separate resources for different groups depending on knowledge?
100% yes. To the first part of the question, 100% yes, I would say. There are people who have very different backgrounds, who have, some of them have a very easy way to access this topic. Some do not have an easy way to access this topic. This might be dependent on where you've worked before, whether you have worked in a startup, maybe you have studied business and you have come across the topic in your studies. Maybe you're from a country where it's quite common. But for example, with Isar Aerospace, it is like we have employees from the earliest hour who were part of this whole program from the beginning on. They know quite well how it works. I don't have to do any special education there anymore, I think. However, we also hire a lot of people in our manufacturing hall, where we have built the rockets. And these are, of course, people who are not, most of them did not work in a startup before. Most of them never came across the concept of employee participation programs. And most of them also compare the ways of being compensated to the ways they've seen before. And if they're coming from German SMEs, manufacturing SMEs, then they have a very different approach to the whole topic of compensation. And then you have to reframe the whole language. You have to also reframe maybe comparisons, and also show them like why we are doing that, and how it is different from what they might know. So 100% yes. And then you also have to change the documents a little bit, change the wording. And for me, individually, I would, for example, always do a dedicated talk in the manufacturing hall and a dedicated talk in the development offices if you want, because there I can, they already know that I will do different comparisons. Yeah. That
is an extremely insightful insight, I think, for everyone in the audience who is, as you said, handling with, let's say, different groups of employees. So thanks so much for sharing this. I see some more question popping up. So I think we'll take maybe 1 more, if that's also okay for you, Martin.
Yes, of course.
So I see that, right. So I see from one person, you mentioned earlier that providing your team with equity make your team act as owners in the business. And this is very interesting. And have you seen a change in the way employees act after integrating Ledgy and introducing equity-based compensation?
Yes. First of all, I think where to start. There are a lot of changes. I think first of all, the people were way more happy and way more appreciative of the topic. So I think that's maybe the most obvious one. People suddenly understood the impact of these shares to the income potentially in the future, and they appreciated it a lot. And also some of them shifted their preferences regarding salary or shares. Which also tells you a lot. Not everybody is, of course, in the situation where you just simply can say, I don't need liquidity. Some people simply need liquidity. So it's nothing that I would judge people on at all. But you can see it with some people. So you see the people start to understand the topic. Yes, you can also see a little bit of change in the way they approach their work, I think. However, I would say that's not purely and only due to EPP. So implementing these participation programs will not grant you ownership-like behavior by employees on its own. You need to combine it with ownership-driven culture, with transparent information. You need to let the people know how things are connected. I think that's also super, super important that people understand the bigger picture. If you are always just underneath the deck on a ship and you're just working on the machines, but you don't know where the ship is going, you might be a super great technician on the engine, but it might also help you to sometimes know where the ship is actually sailing. If you're sailing straight to a coast, you might not put the engine on maximum power, So it gives the people a lot if you show them the bigger picture, and in combination with the participation program, this drives ownership-like behavior. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I think we'll wrap it up here for today, but I'm sure, if the audience has any questions, they can probably reach out to you, Martin, on social media. And yeah, Martin, thank you so much again. Would you have any, last words, any tip you would like to share with the audience today?
I think it's super important that we in Europe get more aware of the importance of employee participation programs. The impact that they can have. I think that's something we all should educate ourselves on, and there is never an end to that education. There are always new options to do things better. But just starting with the topic is, in my opinion, super, super important. And maybe from the Isar Aerospace point of view, I also encourage everybody to, if you have questions regarding new space and how new space could impact your business, feel free to reach out. It's a super interesting discussion that I like to have with all types of startups, because most of the time people are not aware how it actually could impact them, and it impacts them usually.
Totally. Well, Martin, thank you again so much, and we will follow your journey next year. I'm super excited for your plans that are ahead, and yeah, thank you so much again, and have a great day, everyone.
Thanks for having me.